Helena could have taken the easy path. A powerful family name, a job at her father's company, and a life filled with luxury. Instead, she chose a failing tech startup, 18-hour workdays, and the hard road of building something real. Everyone thought she was wasting her potential until her company, Klein Dynamics, became a tech powerhouse worth nearly $2 billion. But Helena never bragged, never flaunted her wealth, and never let success define her identity. Then, at one family dinner, an old Mentor-S watch revealed everything. The question was no longer whether Helena was successful, it was whether her family even understood what success meant.
I'm Clara, I'm 29, and my sustainable fashion label is worth millions. But you'd never know it. I live in a small Brooklyn apartment and choose vintage denim over high fashion. My family? They don't get it. At our huge family dinners, my cousins are covered in designer logos while I show up in something understated. But at our last get-together, that all changed. My cousin Leo made a crack about my simple handbag. As I reached for it, my father A's gaze locked onto my wrist and his whole expression changed. If you're new, tell me where you're from. And subscribe to see how an old watch finally put my rich family in their place. Growing up a Sterling meant private schools and summers on the Riviera, the perfect childhood, right? My dad, Richard, was a Wall Street legend who built his fortune from nothing. My mom, Catherine, came from old money. Her family's name is on art galleries all over town. They gave me every advantage, but always pushed me to earn my own success. My cousins were happy to ride the family coattails, but I was determined to build something that was 100% mine. So after graduating from Parsons, I did the one thing my family never expected. I said no to a cushy high-paying job at my dad's firm. Instead, I took an internship at a tiny broke textile company. My dad was confused, but he supported me. My mom was devastated. She thought I was throwing my potential away. And my cousins, especially Leo, said us nuts. You could have a corner office with your dad. Leo scoffed. Instead, you're getting your coffee for artists who'll be bankrupt in a year. I just smiled and told some things are worth more than a corner office. He looked at me like I was speaking a different language. But that little company felt like home. It was creative, ethical, and just full of passionate people. I poured everything into it, and within 18 months, I was running their design team. That's where I met Julian. He was 70, a design legend who was consulting for us. He became the mentor I never knew I was missing. My father taught me the language of money, but Julian taught me the art of building a brand. He was brilliant, kind, and despite all his success, he had zero interest in status symbols. The man drove a 20-year-old Volvo, wore the same black sweater almost every day, and lived in a simple loft. But he had built 2 global fashion empires from scratch. Real style is quiet, he once told me. The moment you have to show it off, you've already lost. I never forgot that. So when a luxury group bought our company 2 years later, I used my payout to launch my own brand, Aura Atelier. He was my very first investor. Those first years were a brutal grind. I worked non-stop from a tiny studio, pouring every dollar back into the business. My brand was all about creating timeless, sustainable clothes that could challenge the fast fashion world. The mission was clear, but the start was rough, just one disaster after another, from failed collections to completely running out of money. But Julian was my rock. When investors panicked, he stayed calm. When I lost faith in myself, he reminded me why we started. Anytime I was about to quit, he would show up with coffee and tell me about his own worst failures. Then, on my 27th birthday, after a hard year finally turned a corner, Julian gave me a small gift. This watch got me through 2 bankruptcies and 3 different companies, he said. Now it is your turn. Inside was his watch. It wasn't flashy at all, just understated and elegant. It was the iconic Patek Philippe. He was famous for wearing a true collector's dream. I'd seen it in magazines, but I had no idea what it was actually worth. Julian, I can't possibly take this, I whispered. He just laughed. That thing is worth more than your company. I froze. For now, maybe, he added, putting it on my wrist. But not for long. Wear it to remember your own value, not what other people think it is. A few months later, Julian died from a sudden heart attack. I was completely heartbroken. The watch became my most precious possession, not for the price tag, but because it was my link to him. I wore it every single day as I guided the company through a period of explosive growth, now on my own. In the years after he was gone, Aura Atelier became a phenomenon. We were featured in magazines. We opened stores overseas, and I landed on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. But through it all, I lived by Julian's code. I even stayed in my small apartment, though I did eventually get a one-bedroom. I kept taking the subway and stayed completely out of the spotlight. My relatives had no clue how successful my brand had become. To them, I just ran a small business. I'd sit through those family dinners listening to my cousins brag about their new cars and boats. My parents never pried, but I knew my dad saw the articles about my company, and I could tell he was becoming more and more impressed. The annual String Family Dinner is a huge tradition, hosted by my dad and his brother, my Uncle Robert. It's always held at my parents' Connecticut estate, a mansion so huge it's been in architecture magazines. The entire family gets together to eat, drink, and subtly compete over who has the most expensive new toys. My Uncle Robert has always lived in my dad's shadow. See, my dad earned his fortune with pure grit and brilliant risks. Uncle Robert married into a wealthy family and got a cushy job through connections. Their kids are exactly like them. My cousins, Leo especially, measure a person's worth by the price tag on their clothes. These dinners had become a showcase for their latest expensive toy. As I got ready this year, my usual anxiety kicked in, and I thought about what Julian would say. I could almost hear him chuckle. Let them have their shiny cars. You're building an empire. That was all as I needed to hear. I put on my standard uniform, dark trousers, a simple silk top, and Julian's watch. I called a car service to take me to the estate, bracing myself for the evening ahead. Quite a house, the driver said as we drove down the long, winding driveway. I just nodded, watching the familiar mansion come into view, its lights glowing against the night sky. Coming home was always complicated. I was proud of my parents, but I was deeply uncomfortable with all the opulence. Just drop me at the main entrance, I said. As we pulled up, I saw the line of luxury cars already parked there. And of course, there was Leo's new Lamborghini, angled perfectly, so everyone would admire it. Next to it was Uncle Robert's Bentley and my cousin Chloe's brand new Range Rover, the usual lineup. My ride, a simple sedan, felt comically out of place, pulling up to the massive doors. I thanked the driver, tipped him through the app, and stepped out into the cool night. So I saw a curtain twitch in the window. I was sure it was Leo, smirking at my arrival. Before I could ring the bell, the heavy door swung open. It was Arthur, the family butler. His formal look dissolved into a warm smile. Miss Clara, welcome home. Your parents are in the drawing room with everyone, he told me. Thanks, Arthur, I smiled back. How's your son, Ben? He's doing wonderfully. He started at design school this fall, the first in our family to ever go to college. That's amazing, I said, truly delighted. I had helped Ben with his application portfolio. He absolutely loves it, Arthur added. He says you're the reason he chased his dream. I squeezed his arm and walked into the grand entryway. I heard talking and music from the salon, took a deep breath, and walked in to face them. My mother saw me first. Catherine Sterling was a vision in her 60s, effortlessly elegant, in a dress that cost more than my rent for a year. Her silver hair was styled perfectly, her posture regal. She excused herself from my aunt and floated towards me. Clara, darling, she said, kissing the air by my cheeks. Then came the usual once-over, her eyes scanning my outfit. You know, that Dior dress I sent over would have been perfect for tonight. This is more me, Mom, I replied, giving her a real hug. She returned it, but with a slight stiffness. You look lovely, as always, she said with a little sigh. At least that shirt is silk. Now come your cousin Leo just closed some enormous deal at his firm. Of course he had. Leo's accomplishments were always the main event, while mine were rarely mentioned. I followed my mother into the salon, a room filled with priceless antiques and art. About 20 family members mingled with champagne. My father was talking to Uncle Robert by the fireplace, but he looked up the moment I walked in. My father, Richard Sterling, was tall and distinguished. His dark hair now mostly salt and pepper. Unlike my mom, who loved every luxury that money could buy, Dad always seemed a little uncomfortable. He had the expensive cars and multiple homes, but at these formal parties, you could tell he never fully left his humble roots behind. "There she is," he said, leaving his brother to give me a proper hug. His embrace was warm and familiar, smelling of the cologne he always wore. "How was the drive?" "Fine, Dad." "No traffic," I replied. He nodded, studying my face. "You look worn out. Working too hard." "Probably," I admitted, "but business is good." "I'm glad to hear it," he said, his voice low. "I saw your last quarterly filing. That new partnership was as a masterstroke, a huge win." I blinked, completely surprised. "You saw that?" He offered a small smile. "I keep an eye on you, even if you don't think I am." He squeezed my shoulder. "I'm so proud of you, Clara. You're building this your own way." Before I could answer, my Uncle Robert appeared with a cocktail. "Clara, there you are. We thought you'd forgotten all about us successful folk." His laugh was too loud, his smile completely fake. "Hello, Uncle Blake," I said, leaning in for a quick hug. "How are things at Capital?" "Printing money. Absolutely printing it. We just snapped up a tech firm in San Francisco, added $2 billion to our assets under management." He took a long swallow of scotch. "But enough about me. How's that little venture of yours, Shores? Still afloat?" My father shot his brother a look, but I just kept my smile in place. "We're making it work. Thanks for asking." "Right. Grit is what counts," he said, patting my arm with that condescending way he has. "Ethan's around here somewhere. He just made junior partner youngest in the firm's history." "That's wonderful," I said, my voice dripping with fake cheer. "I'll be sure to congratulate him." And just like that, Ethan appeared at his father's elbow. My cousin was 32 and handsome in that expensive way that involves personal trainers and stylists. His suit was clearly bespoke, and his watch was practically blinding with diamonds. "Cousin Amelia," he said, kissing the air near my cheek. "I love the minimalist vibe. So authentic." "Ethan," I replied with a nod. "Congrats on the partnership." He straightened his tie. "Thanks. The new McLaren outside is a little bonus I bought myself. 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. Wow," I said, though I honestly couldn't care less. Victor's watch on my wrist suddenly felt heavy, reminding me of what actually mattered. My cousin Chloe sashayed over next, her heels clicking against the marble. "Amelia, oh my God, it's been ages!" She gave me one of those air kiss hugs that smell like champagne. "I'm obsessed with your hair. It's so real." Chloe was Ethan's younger sister, 26, and already on her second millionaire husband. Her job in public relations mostly involved going to charity balls and posting about them online. "Thanks, Chloe. You look amazing. We just got back from St. Bart's," she said, flicking her perfectly styled hair. "Alejandro has a villa there. You wouldn't believe it. 6 bedrooms, an infinity pool, and its own private beach." She leaned in like she was sharing a secret. "We're actually thinking of buying our own little spot. Nothing crazy, just a simple €3 million getaway." I nodded politely while she kept going. Looking past her, my other cousins were having similar conversations. Justin was showing off his new Patek Philippe to his sisters, who was swiping through pictures from her trip to the Maldives. My aunt was telling my mother about her renovations in Aspen, complaining about the cost of contractors. The entire room was buzzing with talk of buyouts and bonuses, the same old game of who had the most. And I just stood there, wearing Victor's watch, thinking about my team meeting tomorrow. It was with a nonprofit that wanted to use our software to help formerly incarcerated people find jobs. The whiplash between these two worlds was intense, like I was leading a double life. A server announced dinner was ready, a welcome escape. As we headed for the dining room, my father came up beside me. "You're awfully quiet tonight," he said. "Just a little worn out," I told him. "End of the quarter is always a beast." He nodded, then said quietly, "I saw the article about your new initiative, giving your software to those charities for free. That was a class act." I glanced at him surprised. He almost never talked about the specifics of my work. "It just felt like the right thing to do," I said. For a second, I saw real pride in his eyes. "Your grandfather would have done the same thing. He never forgot where he came from." He paused. "Neither have I, no matter what Blake thinks." Just then, we walked into the dining room, where a table for 24 glittered under a massive crystal chandelier. Ornate place cards showed our seats, and to nobody's surprise, I was wedged between Ethan and his wife, Madison. Another family dinner performance was about to begin. The first course landed immediately perfectly seared scallops on snow-white plates. The family got comfortable, wine glasses were refilled, and the show started. These dinners always followed the same tired script. Accomplishments were mentioned offhandedly. Deals were brought up casually. Status was quietly fought over and re-established. "Madison, that necklace is just breathtaking," my aunt said across the table. "Is it new?" Madison absent-mindedly touched the diamond pendant. "Oh, this little thing?" "Yes." Michael surprised me after he closed that tech merger. It's a 12-carat cushion cut. We had it custom-made by that jeweler all the celebrities use. "How lovely," my mother said. "Speaking of mergers, Blake, I heard your firm is circling that company in San Francisco." My uncle dabbed his lips with a napkin. "Yes, we're in the final stages." Ethan was instrumental in the whole process. All heads turned to Ethan, who put on a well-rehearsed humble face, "Just doing my part." "But it should boost our revenue by 30%. We're looking at Asia next," Uncle Blake added. "Ethan has always had a killer instinct for business. He gets it from my side of the family." My father just raised a single eyebrow and took a sip of wine. I knew he was remembering how Blake nearly drove his first company into the ground before marrying a woman with a trust fund. "And Justin, dear, how is the new job?" my mother asked, changing the subject. Justin puffed out his chest. "Challenging, but rewarding. We just closed a $4 billion deal. I'm flying to Dubai next week on the company jet." The chatter continued just like that as the second courses arrived. A roasted beet salad with goat cheese. I kept my head down, only speaking when I was spoken to, trying my best to be invisible. Ethan, though, seems intent on dragging me into the conversation. "So, Amelia," he started, swirling the wine in his glass, "how's the tech startup world treating you? Still crammed into that co-working space downtown?" "Actually, we got our own office last year," I replied calmly. "It's near the financial district." "Oh, that's a pricey neighborhood. The rent must be brutal," he said. I just nodded. "It works for us." "And how big is the team now?" he pushed. "Still just you and those two coders?" "We've been hiring." Ethan shot his father a quick, knowing smirk. "Look, startups are a gamble. 90% of them go bust. The fact that you're still in the game at all is impressive, really." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," I said, my voice flat. Aunt Caroline leaned in, her expression a perfect picture of fake concern. "Sweetheart, if you ever need an exit strategy, the family is here. There's no shame in admitting it's not working. I'm sure your father could find a position for you at his firm." I felt my anger rising but kept my voice steady. "That's very kind, Aunt Caroline. But we're doing just fine." "Of course you are, dear," she said, patting my hand like I was 5 years old. I just get concerned. A young woman has to consider her stability. Building a secure future. Look at Madison. She and her husband just bought that massive house up in the hills. Madison's glowed. The renovations are costing a fortune. but it's such a good investment. We're adding a wine cellar and a screening room. You'll have to come see it when it's done, Amelia. It might give you some ideas. I forced a smile. That sounds wonderful. You know, Uncle Blake added, being an entrepreneur is gutsy, but there's a lot to be said for the security of a major corporation. I had a buddy who tried the startup route. He was a smart guy, great idea. Sank every penny he had into it. And now he's managing a bank branch out in the suburbs. A few relatives nodded gravely at this cautionary tale. I remember your first pitch, Ethan said, slicing into his salmon as the main course was served. What was it again? Some kind of software for mom and pop online shops? That's right, I said, taking a sip of water. Seems like a tiny market, he commented. Those little websites don't have deep pockets. Now, if you were selling to Fortune 500 companies, he let the thought hang in the air, shaking his head. We serve a wide range of clients, I said, keeping my answer short. Blake wasn't letting it go. I'm just worried about your financial stability, especially in this economy. Startup funding has completely dried up since the market tanked. I thought about the $30 million funding round we'd closed last quarter, and the 3 new term sheets sitting in my inbox. We're doing fine. My father cleared his throat. Amelia's company is performing remarkably well. Their growth rate is frankly off the charts. Blake looked stunned for a second before his condescending smile returned. Well, good for her. It's wonderful to chase a passion, even if it requires a few lifestyle sacrifices. Madison, Ethan's wife, instantly picked up on his patronizing tone. Exactly, Amelia. I really admire you for embracing a simpler life. It must feel so authentic, you know, living like a normal person. I could feel my father watching me, his face a stone mask. My mother was a wreck, wanting to jump to my defense but terrified of making a scene at her own dinner party. I calmly replied that there was dignity in living within your means. It was something Victor always said. Victor? Uncle Blake asked. Victor Corbin, I clarified. My mentor. He passed away last year. Oh, that bizarre recluse, Blake scoffed. I read his obituary. Made a fortune in AI and then lived like a hermit. A total eccentric. Hearing Victor talked about like that made my jaw tighten. But I held my tongue. He believed your real net worth was the impact you had, not the number in your bank account. Blake snorted. That's easy to say when you're sitting on billions of dollars. I'm sure he had a private jet and a few mansions stashed away somewhere. Actually, he flew commercial and owned one modest house in Seattle, I corrected him. He funneled most of his money into his foundation for kids in underserved communities. Well, to each their own, Blake shrugged. But I don't see anything wrong with enjoying your success. Life is short. What's the point of winning the game if you can't throw a victory, Pearl? As they all started talking about Madison's upcoming ski trip to Aspen, I felt the cool, familiar weight of Victor's watch on my wrist. I thought of his quiet confidence, his deep curiosity about people, and his belief that success was about improving lives, not owning things. The gap between his world and the one in this dining room felt a mile wide. My thoughts were cut off by my cousin Chloe, gushing about her new custom Range Rover. The interior is all hand-stitched. It took 4 months, but when you're driving around the Gold Coast, you have to send the right message. Blake nodded eagerly. Image is everything. The right car, the right address, the right friends. It tells everyone exactly what you're worth. He turned to me, a smug smile plastered on his face. Speaking of which, Amelia, I saw you showed up in a taxi. Still taking the train everywhere? A hush fell over the table as all eyes turned to me. The question was dripping with contempt. I saw my mother's pained expression, my aunt's pity, my uncle's pride in his son's pathetic dig. But it was my father's free actions truly stunned me. He wasn't looking at Blake. He was staring at my wrist, where Victor's watch peeked out from under my sleeve. His eyes were wide, wine's glass frozen halfway to his lips. He was gazing at my watch with pure disbelief. Blake, assuming my father was just embarrassed for me, decided to twist the knife. I mean, there's being frugal, and then there's just punishing yourself. The city transit is a total disaster, and you never know what kind of creeps you'll be next to. I opened my mouth to fire back, but my father spoke first. Is that what I think it is? He asked, his voice sharp, slicing right through Blake's smug little speech. He was still staring at my wrist, and his focus pulled the whole table's attention right along with him. I glanced down at Victor's watch, feeling suddenly put on the spot. What do you mean? Your watch, he said, setting his glass down with a firm click. Let me see it. The table was now completely silent. Blake just looked confused by the sudden strange turn in the conversation. I hesitated for just a moment, then extended my arm across the table. My father leaned forward, his eyes filled with awe as he inspected the watch. This is a Victor Corbin original, he said, his voice barely a whisper. From his first and only Apex collection. Uncle Robert frowned. The AI billionaire who died. He was a watchmaker before he ever wrote a single line of code, my father explained, still examining the piece. He was a master watchmaker. He crafted a small number of these by hand before his first software company ever took off. Only 20 were ever made. He looked up at me, his face a mixture of shock and a new dawning respect. How on earth did you get this? Blake's mockery was now just a sour taste hanging in the air. Victor gave it to me, I said simply. He was my mentor and one of my company's very first investors. My father leaned back in his chair, looking completely floored. Do you have any idea what this watch is worth? I nodded. I know it's valuable, but that's not why I have it. That, my father announced to the entire table, is a $5 million watch. Possibly more, considering its rarity and the fact that Victor is gone. You could hear a pin drop. Blake's jaw literally fell open. Madison's fork hit her plate with a loud clank. Aunt Caroline actually started choking on her water. Oh, this old thing? I said with a little shrug. Pull my sleeve back down. I wear it every day. Victor always said beautiful things were made to be enjoyed, not hidden away. My father just kept shaking his head, totally captivated. The craftsmanship is incredible. Victor made every single component by hand. The internal mechanism is a revolutionary design he patented himself. Collectors have tried to find these for years. Most are in museums or private collections. Uncle Robert was now staring at the watch, his eyes bulging. $5 million. On your wrist. I hope you have that thing insured, Amelia. It is, I assured him. Victor handled the insurance policy himself when he gave it to me. He said it was the first thing he ever created that he thought was truly perfect. Blake had finally managed to speak again, though his tone had done a complete 180. I had no idea you were personally connected to Victor Corbin. The man was an absolute icon. He was more than that, I said softly. He was my friend. He believed in my vision when very few other people did. So what is your company exactly? Uncle Robert asked. All earlier condescension was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity. You've always been so quiet about what you do. I took a sip of water, figuring this was the right time. Victor always said timing is everything. We built an AI platform that uses machine learning to streamline supply chains for independent retailers, as I explained. We started with small online shops because they were an underserved market, but we've grown a lot since then. We now work with several Fortune 500 companies, a few major hospital networks, and even the Department of Defense. My mother stared at me. The Department of Defense. You never told us that. The contract was finalized last month, I said. We're deploying our system across 3 different branches this year. It is the largest deal in our company's history. How large? Blake asked, his envy now mixed with total awe. I looked him right in the eye. $900 million over 5 years. Another wave of stunned silence rolled across the dining room. My father was beaming with pride. My mother just looked lost. "But you're still in that little apartment downtown?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion. "And you take the train?" I just smiled. "I like my apartment. It's close to the office, and it's a block away from my favorite park. As for the train, it's efficient and it's much better for the planet." Victor took the bus to work every single day, even after he was billionaire. "A true Corbin disciple," my father murmured, looking at me with a new appreciation. Blake was struggling to recalibrate, trying to make this new reality fit his image of me. "So your startup is actually a big deal." I nodded. "It is. We were valued at $1.8 billion after our last funding round, and I am still the majority shareholder." Uncle Robert choked on his bread, and Aunt Carol Ann's eyes were as wide as saucers. Edison was furiously typing on her phone, no doubt looking up my company's name. "You're a billionaire?" Blake asked, his voice thin with shock. "On paper, perhaps," I clarified. "Most of my wealth is tied up in company stock. I pay myself a reasonable salary and live a pretty normal life." "But why would you hide it?" Chloe asked, completely baffled. "If I had that kind of money, I'd want the entire world to know." I thought of Victor, of his quiet humility, of how he never needed to impress a single person. Real success isn't about what other people think, it's about what you build and the problems you actually solve. Our software has helped thousands of small businesses survive. It's helped get medical supplies to rural areas that were once cut off. That means more to me than some number in a bank account. My father nodded slowly. That was Victor's whole philosophy. It's about the work, not the praise. I always respected that about him. Blake just sat there, unable to process it. His entire worldview, where I was firmly at the bottom of the family food chain, had been demolished in less than 10 minutes. "But your clothes, your apartment, those are choices," I said, finishing his thought. "Just like your choices reflect your values. Victor taught me you show people who you are by what you prioritize, not by what you say." The dinner went on, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Aunts, and uncles who'd barely made eye contact were now desperate to hear what I had to say. Questions flew at me about my work, my mentor Victor, and my plans for the future. I just stayed cool, refusing to brag or play into their sudden curiosity. When dessert arrived, Blake leaned over, his voice a low whisper just for me. "Amelia, I owe you an apology. I've been a total jerk. I just figured that since you never flaunted your success, you must not have any." I studied him for a moment, seeing past the designer suit and the cocky attitude to the deep insecurity he was hiding. "Success looks different for everyone, Blake. I don't judge how you live your life. I would just appreciate it if you gave me the same courtesy." He nodded, looking genuinely humbled for a second. "That watch," he said, "it really is something else. Victor must have thought the world of you." I glanced down at the watch on my wrist. It's a reminder of what's actually important. Not the price tag, but what it represents. Vision, integrity, and building something that actually lasts. As I said it, I caught my father watching at me from across the table with a strange, thoughtful look. For the first time, he wasn't seeing his little girl who needed his advice. He was seeing a woman who had built her own world, completely on her own terms. In that single glance, something changed between us. A new kind of respect was finally taking root. The watch that had been Victor's quiet signature was now telling my story, bringing secrets to light I'd kept hidden not out of shame, but because I wanted people to see me for who I am, not what I own. As the evening wound down, I was thankful for its steady weight on my wrist, a connection to the man who shaped not just my career, but my entire life. As the dentist plates were cleared, the conversation turned back to my watch and its legendary owner. My Uncle Robert, quiet until now, finally voiced what they were all thinking. "I still can't wrap my head around Victor Corbin being your mentor," he said, stirring his espresso. "Silas Croft was famous for guarding his time and his money. How did you two even meet? Every head at the dinner table swiveled my way. Even the servers paused, sensing a story brewing. My father leaned forward, as curious as anyone. I met Silas at a small biotech firm called GeneTech right after my doctorate. He was a special advisor brought in to save us from going under. We were burning through our funding, and our lead drug trial had just failed. I remember them, my cousin Leo chimed in. Didn't they get bought by Pfizer eventually? I nodded. For nearly $1 billion. But at the time, we were just weeks from laying everyone off. Silas came in and tore our entire research strategy apart. He had this incredible focus, a way of seeing the one critical variable that would make or break the science. That was his genius, my father added. I heard him speak at us once. The man's clarity was on another level. He noticed me in the labs, questioning methods the senior scientists just took for granted, I continued. After a very tense meeting, he asked me to get a coffee. We ended up talking for 4 hours straight. By the end of it, he offered to be my mentor. Just like that? My Uncle Robert asked, his voice full of doubt. Silas made big bets on people he believed in, I said. He told me later he saw a younger version of himself in me, that I approached problems from an angle no one else considered. My mother, who'd been listening quietly, finally spoke up. And he backed your new company when you went out on your own, didn't he? He was my first and only angel investor, I confirmed. He invested $500,000 on a handshake. No pitch deck, no 5-year plan. He said he was investing in me, not just my idea. That's a terrible way to do business, Uncle Robert grumbled, annoyed by the sheer lack of process. I just smiled. Silas was never a conventional man. He knew real breakthroughs come from passion and trust, not from bureaucracy and spreadsheets. He wrote that first check and told me to build something that mattered. His only 2 rules were that I never give up control of my company and that I use a piece of the profits to help others. The foundation you started, my father said, nodding slowly. The one for science scholarships in low-income schools. That was part of your deal with Croft. Yes, I said, surprised he knew the details. Although I would have done it anyway. Silas taught me that wealth comes with a profound responsibility. My cousin Maya, who'd been scrolling on her phones, suddenly sat bolt upright. Forbes says GeneLeap is targeting a $4 billion valuation. They're talking about a potential public offering next year. She just gaped at me. You named the company after his core belief. It felt right, I said softly. His principles are the foundation of everything we're trying to build. But why hide it? My Aunt Carol asked, waving a hand at my simple dress. You could be living in a high-rise on the river, driving a new Mercedes, wearing designer clothes. I tried to find a way to explain a mindset so different from everyone else at that table. When Silas gave me this watch, he told me something I'll never forget. He said, the second your success becomes a performance for other people is the second you've lost. I don't need the flash to know my work is real. My father nodded, a look of genuine respect finally replacing his curiosity. Croft always knew that true strength is to know your own worth without needing a round of applause. It's why even his biggest rivals respected him. Exactly, I said, and he lived that truth every day. The most important lessons he taught me weren't about finance or managing a team. They were about integrity, about finding a purpose, and about the duty that comes with having influence. Leo, who'd been quiet for a while, spoke up again. So that watch, it's worth more to you than just its price tag, isn't it? It is completely priceless, I confirmed. Silas wore this when he got the call that his first drug was approved by the FDA. He said it kept him humble, a reminder of the years of patience it takes to build something that lasts. My dad just smiled. And now you wear it while you build your own legacy. I shook my head. It's not a legacy, Dad. It's a cure. Our research is helping create therapies that save lives. The money is just a side effect. It was never the actual goal. My uncle looked unconvinced, but my father nodded, really starting to get it. I could feel his opinion of me shifting, a mix of pride and regret for having missed it. That partnership with the NIH, he said, was that the one announced last month to fast-track new cancer treatments? Yes, I confirmed. We won that grant over some of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. Our platform should accelerate research by 5 to 10 years and help countless patients. That was your company? My Uncle Henry sputtered. It was all over the financial news. They never once mentioned your name. I prefer to stay out of the spotlight, I told him. I want the work to speak for itself. But now, surely, Aunt Pamela insisted, you'll get a bigger place? A nicer car. I just gave a polite smile. I'm very happy where I am. It's practical. It has everything I need. I've lived in the same simple house for 30 years, even after becoming a billionaire. My grandfather taught me that more stuff doesn't make you happier. So you just spend all your time working? My sister Chloe asked, her tone just dripping with pity. I work on things that I find meaningful, I corrected her. But I also travel, volunteer, and see friends who value me for me, not my bank account. My life is full. And what about the foundation? My dad asked. Tell us about that. A genuine smile finally broke across my face. Now this was something I was genuinely proud of. The Reed Foundation for Technological Equity. We provide tech, education, and mentorship for kids in underserved communities. This means full scholarships, new laptops, paid internships, and long-term support. Our first group of 50 students is about halfway through the program right now. They're incredible. 50 students? My Uncle Ben questioned. That seems a little small for a person with your kind of money. We're just starting out, I replied. The program is intensive and very personal. We want to perfect our model before we scale it, but our goal is to reach 10,000 students a year within a decade. 5,000 lives changed, my father said softly. Now that's a real return on investment, worth more than any stock portfolio. I couldn't agree more. Silas always said his real legacy wasn't the patents he filed, but the people he lifted up and the doors he opened. As we finished dessert and the family started drifting towards the study, I felt the air around me change. Their attention had a new intensity, as if they were all re-evaluating my position in the family. It was the exact thing I had always tried to avoid, being defined by my net worth instead of my character. Blake caught up with me in the hallway, surrounded by generations of family portraits. I feel like I have to completely rewire my brain about you, he said. I honestly spent all this time feeling sorrier for you, thinking you were just getting by. And the whole time, you could probably buy this entire street and not even notice. I stopped and looked directly at him. That's precisely why I never discuss my work in terms of money, Blake. I didn't want to be treated differently. It's the least interesting part of my life. He looked genuinely baffled. But isn't that the point? To get credit for being successful. The only credit I need is seeing our gene therapies help patients walk again, I said, and watching kids from our foundation get accepted into top PhD programs. I know Silas would be proud of that. Blake glanced at my simple watch, then back at my face. I think I could stand to learn a few things from you, Chloe. For the first time all night, his voice was completely sincere. We were in the study now, a classic scenes of dark wood, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The party splintered into smaller groups, and I was suddenly the center of gravity in conversations where I used to be invisible. Uncle Robert suddenly wanted my thoughts on the biotech market. Aunt Cackle was suddenly trying to introduce me to her friend on the board of the local hospital. Even my cousin James, who usually just nods at me, was asking about my company's growth strategy. I poured a glass of whiskey and found a quiet corner just to breathe. The revelation of my success had warped everyone's behavior in a way that was both funny and profoundly unsettling. I was the same person who'd shown up in a 10-year-old car, but now they saw someone else completely. Quite the show you're putting on, my father said, appearing at my elbow with his own drink. Mind if I hide out with you for a minute? I motioned to the empty chair next to mine. Be my guest. He sat, taking a slow sip from his glass. You know, I always respected how private you were, how you forged your own path, but I never imagined this is what you were building. Would it have mattered if you knew? I asked quietly. He considered it for a moment. I've always been proud of you, Chloe, but I might have done a better job shutting down some of the family's more patronizing comments over the years. I can handle a little patronizing, I told him. It's this instant reversal, now that they know the valuation, that I find so bizarre. My dad just got it. Big money makes you a target. It's why I'm cautious after a strong quarter. Arthur had the same issue, I replied. He used to say his real friends, the ones who knew him before the billions, could fit in a single car. Sounds like one hell of a mentor. My father swirled the gin in his glass. I wish I'd known him better. We'd see each other at charity galas, but never really talked. You two have clicked, I said. All that brilliance, zero ego. He was the real deal. Takes one to know one, my father said, giving me a rare warm smile. You know, watching you navigate this room tonight, I saw a younger version of myself. That same drive to build something that lasts, to be known for your mind, not your inheritance. That stopped me. My dad always seemed perfectly comfortable in his world of old money and the privilege that came with it. Seriously? But you love all this. I waved a hand at the sprawling gilded ballroom. He chuckled softly. Your mother loves it. I put up with it to make her happy. Honestly, I'd be just as happy in a place a quarter this size. He leaned in. Why do you think I'm always at the firm? Or that fishing cabin up in Maine? All this, he gestured around. This was never what got me out of bed in the morning. I never knew, I confessed. I guess we're both pretty skilled at hiding who we really are. He took another drink. Maybe too skilled. I should have watched what you were building more closely. I should have celebrated your success years ago. You saw what mattered, I reassured him. You were reading those clinical trial reports, weren't you? He smirked. It started as professional due diligence. It turned into pure pride in what you were creating. But I respected that you had to do it on your own. I didn't want to interfere. And I appreciate that more than you know, I said, and I meant it. It meant the world to me to build this my way. My father's expression grew serious. The watch. It really was one of Arthur's. I nodded, holding my wrist out so he could see it in the dim light. He gave it to me for my 21st birthday, said it got him through hell and back, and now it was my turn. My father studied it with an expert's eye, admiring the complex movement inside. I'd heard rumors about his personal collection, but you never see them. He gave them all away to people he mentored. Nothing ever hit the auction block. I told him Arthur actually made this himself, spending 3 years on it while getting his first patent. He said it taught him patience and precision, 2 lessons that defined his entire career. Clearly, my father said, his eyes flicking from the watch to my face. And now they're defining yours. Our conversation was broken by my cousin Ethan, who came over looking much less arrogant than before. Excuse me, Uncle David. Can I borrow Chloe for a moment? My father looked at me, and I gave a small nod. Of course. I need to find your mother anyway. She's probably planning to endow a new hospital wing, now that she knows you show and afford a Rothko. He winked at me and walked away. Ethan sat in the now empty chair, his earlier swagger gone. I need to apologize properly, Chloe. My attitude tonight, and honestly, every time we've seen each other for the last 5 years, was way out of line. I just watched him trying to read if he was for real. Apology accepted. But tells me something. What exactly are you sorry for? He looked surprised. For making you feel small. For all the cheap shots about your tiny apartment, your career, everything. And if my company was worth $10,000 instead of $5 billion, would you still be saying this to me right now? I asked. Ethan actually had the decency to look ashamed. That's a fair question. It's the only question that matters, I told him. Because if you're only sorry now that I'm successful, sequel, you haven't learned a thing. He was quiet for a long time, genuinely thinking it over. You're right, he said at last. I've been using the wrong kind of scoreboard to measure people, myself included. It's the way I was raised, but that's not an excuse. It's never too late to change your perspective, I said, my tone softening. Arthur was almost 50 before he figured out his own relationship with money. It changed everything for him. I'd like to hear about him sometime, if you're ever open to it, Ethan said. I'd like that, I replied, genuinely surprised. Just then, my mother descended, her face a perfect picture of panic. Chloe, darling, I feel just terrible about all those little jokes about your beat-up car, your tiny apartment, your whole life. She sat down, grabbing both my hands. If I had any idea what you were building, Mom, I cut in gently. That's exactly why I kept it quiet. I needed you to love my life for what it was, not for what it was worth. She just stared at me, bewildered. But we just want you to have the best. Seeing you struggle when you could have had anything you wanted. This is what I want, I told her. A biotech company that saves lives. A foundation that gives scholarships to smart kids. A life built on purpose, not on possessions. But you can have both, she insisted. A life of meaning and beautiful things. I glanced at the watch Arthur gave me. I already do. This is the most priceless thing I'll ever own. Not because of the cost, but because of the man who gave it to me. And that's true for my work and my friends, too. My mother sighed, still not really understanding. Well, at the very least, you have to let me get you a proper penthouse somewhere with security. I couldn't help but smile. Some things never change. I love you, Mom, even when you're trying to stage a hostile takeover of my life. She finally smiled back. And I love you, even when you refuse to wear a perfectly good Chanel dress. As the party wound down, I realized I'd had more real conversations than in the past 10 years of holidays combined. Some of my relatives were obviously still in shock, their image of me shattered. Others seemed to be second-guessing their own definitions of wealth. And a few, like my dad, were seeing me in a new light, looking past the quiet niece and the staggering valuation to the person I'd fought to become. When it was finally time to go, I called for a car, turning down several offers for a ride home. My father walked me to the massive front door to wait. You've given everyone a lot to think about tonight, he said, especially me. That was never my intention, I told him truthfully. I just wanted everyone to see me for me, not as a charity case or a success story. He nodded thoughtfully. Arthur's real legacy isn't the money or the patents. It's the way he taught people what true value really is. He put a hand on my shoulder. I'd love to tour your lab, meet your team. See what you're really building over there. I would love that, I said, a real smile spreading across my face. How's next week? I can walk you through our latest project and introduce you to the whole crew. It's a date, he said as my car pulled up. And Chloe, don't ever take that watch off. It's right where it belongs. Sliding into the back seat, I glanced at the watch on my wrist, thinking about how some things and some people have secrets you'd never guess. For most of my family, this watch made me a business prodigy overnight. But for me, it was always my connection to the man who taught me that value isn't something you own. It's something you create. 3 weeks after that insane family dinner, I was in my office with a view of Boston Harbor. The space was modern and minimalist glass, reclaimed wood, and focused workstations. No expensive art, just framed photos of our team with the patience our technology had helped. My father's visit had been even better than I could have imagined. He showed up early for the tour, met my lead scientists, and asked incredibly smart questions about our diagnostic tools and our market strategy. I was so proud watching him talk to my lead programmer, completely absorbed in the code they were writing. Before he left, he was exchanging numbers with my chief of research, already planning introductions to his network. "You've built something incredible here," he said as we stood on our small balcony overlooking the city. "It's not just the tech, it's the culture. Your people believe in the mission." I just smiled and told him that was the entire point, to build something that actually mattered. As I reviewed the architectural plans for our foundation's new building, I was struck by how much had shifted since that dinner party. My day-to-day life was the same, but my family was completely different. My dad and I now talked a couple times a week about science, philanthropy, and even the mechanics of vintage watches, a new shared interest. My mom finally dropped the penthouse campaign, but she still mailed me designer scarves. The biggest change, though, was Ethan. He actually followed through on learning about my mentor's philosophy. We had coffee twice, and I was shocked by how committed he was to changing his worldview. He started volunteering at a STEM program for underprivileged teens and found out he was a natural teacher, which surprised him most of all. The entire family felt lighter. At a cousin's wedding last weekend, the talk was about legacy, not just portfolios. It was a beginning, at least. A soft knock on my office door pulled me from my thoughts. "Your 2:30 is here." The scholarship finalist. "Send her in," I said, getting up from my desk. Maya entered, looking nervous but determined, a 17-year-old with fire in her eyes. She had applied to our foundation's mentorship program with this amazing proposal to use data analytics to fight urban hunger. "Miss Evans," she began, formally shaking my hand. "Thank you for your time." "Please, call me Jenna," I told her, showing her to a seat. "Sarah, I was so impressed with your application. Your idea for mapping food deserts using both public and private data was just brilliant." Her face absolutely lit up. "My family relies on food banks," she said, "so I know the struggle to get help. I want to build solutions, not just complain about the problem." As she walked me through her entire plan, her passion was just undeniable. She reminded me so much of myself at her age, except she was facing challenges I never even imagined. This is exactly the kind of person my grandfather Samuel wanted to empower, someone driven to create real lasting change. How would you feel about being the very first student in our new mentorship program? I asked. You'd work directly with our data science team on your project every week, with access to all our resources, and we'd provide a stipend. Her eyes went wide. Are you serious? That would be life-changing. Absolutely, I said. Your idea could actually work. With the right support, it could help countless families. While we sorted out all the logistics, I felt the familiar weight of Samuel's watch on my wrists, reminding me of the responsibility that comes with privilege. Supporting Sarah was the perfect way to honor his legacy by investing in the future. After Sarah left, practically floating on air, I called my dad, Arthur, to tell him about the program. He listened intently, and then he just stunned me. "I want to get involved with the foundation," he said. "Not just by writing a check, I want to actually give my time. I have a few decades of business experience that might be helpful," he offered. "Arthur, that's amazing," I replied, completely moved. "The students could learn so much from you, and I could probably learn a thing or two from their hustle," he answered. "Jenna, what you said at that dinner wasn't just a shock. It made me totally reevaluate my definition of success. I want to build a legacy that's more than just property and stock certificates." As we planned his role, I marveled at how one honest dinner conversation was creating such powerful ripples of change. Choosing to live by my grandfather's principles wasn't just changing me, it was changing everyone I knew. That evening, on the subway ride home, I looked at all the different faces. A construction worker covered in dust, an exhausted nurse, students loaded with books, a lawyer in a suit that looked just like mine. Every single one of them has their own story, their own version of what matters. My grandfather Samuel saw the world that way. He saw the person, not their job title. He valued character over capital. Back in my apartment, I held his watch, feeling its solid, comforting weight. It was so much more than just a watch now. It had become my compass, guiding my choices and reminding me that real wealth isn't what you have, but what you give. It's about how you see yourself, not how others see you. This watch wasn't some museum piece to be locked away. It would stay right here on my wrist through tough business deals and charity events, family meals, and quiet nights at home. It would measure my life just as it measured my grandfather's, by the steady building of something worthwhile. As I was getting ready for bed, my phone lit up with a text from Arthur. He had just finished his first mentoring session and was completely energized. I think I finally understand what Samuel meant, he wrote. Impact over image. Thanks for showing me what it really means to be wealthy. I smiled and texted back, thinking that genuine connections and a sense of purpose are the only things worth counting. The watch might have been what started that conversation at dinner, but it was the philosophy behind it that really mattered. The belief that our worth comes from our actions, not our bank balances. Has an object you own ever taught you something important about yourself? Or this is genuineness is a completist new once they understood what you stand for. Let me know your story in the comments below. If this stories about finding a different kinds of success resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you would like this video and subscribe for more content about what truly matters in a world obsessed with status. And please remember, most valuable things in life are never measured by a price tag, but by the meaning we give them. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, I hope you always know your own incredible worth, which is something no amount of money can ever buy.